My name is Odessa Sterling and I am 30 years old. 2 days before my wedding, my dad called. It was a Thursday. I was on the floor wrapping white roses for my bouquet, tape on my fingers, playlist on low, and the caller ID said, "Dad," so I picked up with my shoulder because my hands were full. 9 words, that is all it took. "I won't be walking you down the aisle." I set the floral tape on the table, wiped my hands on my jeans, said nothing for maybe 5 seconds, which does not sound long until you are the one counting. Delphine says it would upset her. He said, "Your sister." Delphine younger, single, no kids, and apparently still the center of every decision my parents make, even mine. "Your sister is going through a rough time, Odessa. Her wedding, you know." I did know, but this was my wedding, not hers. 10 minutes later my mom called to finish the job. "Go solo. Stop making drama. Lots of modern brides walk alone." She said it like she was reading a brochure. 48 hours later, 120 people would turn around when those heavy doors opened, and the man holding my arm would not be my father. Welcome, Final Cosmic Stories. This is a place where we share real stories about family, boundaries, and the people who show up when it matters most. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. The sun beat down heavily on the metal roof of my 2018 Ford Transit van. I was driving east on Interstate 10, cutting through the dry, endless heat of the Chihuahuan Desert. The air conditioning had stopped working somewhere near El Paso, and warm wind blew through the open windows, tossing my hair across my face. My hands gripped the sticky steering wheel. They were rough, covered in tiny healing cuts from floral wire and rose thorns. I am an event floral designer. In the back of the van, safely packed in cooling boxes, were hundreds of rare desert succulents and dried native grasses. I had just spent 3 days at a specialty farm in Texas, sourcing flowers for a massive wedding contract back home in Savannah, Georgia. I needed everything to be perfect. The contract was worth $12,500, and my small business, Savannah Stems, needed the money to survive the winter season. My phone vibrated on the dashboard. It was a text message from my mother, Blythe. "Your father is hosting a charity dinner for the hospital board tonight at 7:30 p.m. Don't be late. And please, wear the silk blue dress. Make sure your fingernails are clean this time." I stared at the screen, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest. I didn't reply. My father, Mercer Sterling, was a man who built empires. He owned the largest commercial real estate firm in Savannah. If you walked downtown, you would see his name on the side of tall glass buildings. In public, he was a hero. Society loved him. He donated large checks to the children's wing at St. Joseph's Hospital. He smiled for the cameras with a warm, heavy handshake. People always told me, "You are so lucky to have a father like Mercer." But inside the heavy wooden doors of our large historic home on Monterey Square, he was a king who demanded total obedience. He didn't use his hands to control us. He used his wallet, his approval, and his quiet, sharp words. My younger sister, Delphine, never had to worry about those words. She was 24, delicate, and spent her days planning luncheons and shopping for shoes. Last month, when Delphine scratched the paint on her new Mercedes, my father just laughed, patted her head, and paid the $3,000 repair bill the very next morning. I, on the other hand, worked 70 hours a week. I operated my floral business out of the old glass greenhouse located on an adjacent lot just behind my father's property. He didn't let me use it for free. Every single month, on the first day of the month, I wrote him a check for $1,500 for rent. If I was even 1 day late, he would threaten to change the locks and throw my expensive flowers into the trash. My older brother Callahan saw all of this, but he never spoke up. Callahan worked as a financial analyst for my father's company. He had a wife and a mortgage that my father had paid the down payment on. Because of that money, Callahan kept his head down. Whenever my father raised his voice at the dinner table, Callahan would just stare down at his plate and slowly cut his food. So, why did I stay? Why did I keep paying him rent? Why didn't I just move my business to a different location? The answer was simple, and it hurt. The greenhouse was the only place where I still felt close to my grandmother, who taught me how to plant seeds when I was a little girl. And deep down in my heart, I had a foolish, stubborn hope. I believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I grew my business, if I paid my rent on time and never complained, my father would finally look at me the way he looked at Delphine. I thought I could earn his respect. I thought about last Thanksgiving. We were all sitting around the long dining table. My father raised his glass of expensive red wine for a toast. He praised Delphine for her beautiful, gentle spirit. He praised Callahan for his sharp mind for numbers. When he finally looked at me, he smiled a thin, cold smile. "And Odessa," he said loudly, making sure all our guests were listening. "Well, She certainly knows how to play in the dirt like a little boy. Let's hope she finally washes her hands before her wedding." Everyone at the table laughed. Delphine giggled behind her napkin. I forced myself to laugh too, even though my throat felt tight and my eyes burned. Under the table, my mother pinched my leg hard. "Don't ruin his joke," she whispered in my ear. "Stop making everything about you." Now driving down the empty desert highway, I looked at the calendar on my dashboard screen. October 12th, 2023. I was getting married to my fiancé Thayer in exactly 2 months. Thayer was a middle school science teacher. He was kind, patient, and drove a beat-up Honda. My father barely knew Thayer's name, mostly because Thayer didn't care about real estate or power. I pressed my foot down on the gas pedal, watching the white lines of the road blur together. I just wanted to get back to Savannah. I just wanted to keep the peace. The weeks following my Texas trip slipped away in a blur of long hours. By early December, Savannah's sticky heat had faded into a sharp, damp chill. The old glass walls of my greenhouse were covered in morning frost. Inside, the air smelled heavily of fresh pine, eucalyptus, and wet dirt. My wedding to Thayer was scheduled for December 14th, 2023, at the Riverside Cotton Mill. We had paid the $8,000 venue deposit ourselves, draining our small savings account. I wanted a quiet, simple evening, but as the date grew closer, my family slowly took over. It started with small things. On November 20th, my father walked into my greenhouse. He handed me a crisp white envelope. "I've added 45 names to your guest list," he said, fixing his expensive gold watch. "Business partners, mostly. The mayor, the hospital board members. It's a good networking opportunity for the firm." I wiped my dirty hands on my apron. "Dad, the mill only holds 120 people. We can't fit them. Thayer's family is all ready." "Thayer's family will understand," he interrupted, his voice dropping to that smooth, quiet tone that meant he was not asking. "I am paying for the open bar, Odessa. It is the least you can do to support the family name. We have a certain image to maintain in this town." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. I rearranged the seating chart that night, putting Thayer's aunts and uncles at the back near the kitchen doors. Then, there was Delphine. Delphine's own engagement to a wealthy young lawyer had ended 6 months ago. Ever since then, my wedding was treated like a dangerous disease in our house. We weren't allowed to talk about my dress or the cake in front of her. "Be sensitive to your sister's feelings," my mother would scold me. "She is going through a very fragile time." On December 5th, Delphine called me in tears because the silver bridesmaid dresses I chose made her look washed out and depressed. The next morning, my mother took Delphine shopping and bought her a floor-length silk dress. It was a pale, glittering ivory color. It looked exactly like a wedding gown. When I tried to tell my mother it was inappropriate, she sighed heavily and told me I was being selfish. I accepted it all. I kept my head down, built my floral arrangements, and counted the days until December 14th. I just wanted to get down the aisle. I just wanted my father to stand beside me, take my arm, and proudly give me away. I wanted that one, normal, perfect family moment. Then came the morning of December 12th, 2 days before the wedding. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment living room. Thayer was at the kitchen counter, writing the final seating cards. I was carefully wrapping white roses with green floral tape for my bouquet. Outside, a cold rain was hitting the windows. My cell phone rang from the coffee table. The screen showed my father's name. I wiped my hands and picked it up. "Hi, Dad," I said, wedging the phone between my ear and my shoulder so I could keep wrapping the flowers. "Did you pick up your tuxedo from the tailor?" There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I heard the faint clinking of a coffee cup hitting a saucer. "Odessa," my father said. His voice was perfectly calm, like he was canceling a lunch meeting. "I'm calling to let you know that I won't be walking you down the aisle on Saturday." My fingers stopped moving. The roll of green tape slipped from my hand and rolled across the wooden floor. "What?" I whispered. "Dad, the rehearsal dinner is tomorrow." "What are you talking about?" "Delphine is having a very difficult week," he explained, his tone completely flat. "Seeing me walk you down the aisle, knowing her own wedding was canceled, it's just too much for her right now. It's causing her severe anxiety. Your sister says it would upset her too deeply, and as a father, I have to protect her mental health." My breath caught in my throat. My chest felt like it was being crushed under a heavy stone. "You're punishing me because Delphine's engagement ended? Dad, please, you can't do this. I'm your daughter too." "I am not punishing anyone, Odessa," he replied smoothly. "I am keeping the peace in this family. You are strong. You can handle walking a few feet by yourself. Delphine cannot handle this. Dad, please." There was a rustling sound, and then my mother's sharp, annoyed voice came through the speaker. "Odessa, enough," Blythe snapped. "Go solo. Stop making drama out of everything. Delphine has been crying all morning. Your father is doing the right thing for this family. We will see you at the venue. Goodbye." The line went dead. The silence in the room was deafening. I slowly lowered the phone. Thayer turned around from the kitchen counter, his pen stopping in mid-air when he saw my face. For 30 years I had believed that if I was just quiet enough, helpful enough, and invisible enough, they would eventually love me. I paid rent to work in my own childhood backyard. I hid my own joy so my sister wouldn't be uncomfortable. I let them erase me. Sitting on the floor, surrounded by half-finished wedding flowers, the final piece of the mask fell away. They weren't protecting Delphine. They were choosing her, just like they always did, and they didn't care if it destroyed me in the process. I didn't cry. Instead, a very cold, very clear feeling washed over my entire body. Thayer knelt on the wooden floor beside me. The rain continued to hit the window glass, a steady, cold drumming sound. He gently took the phone from my hand and set it on the coffee table. "Odessa?" he asked softly, searching my face. "What did Mercer say?" I looked at Thayer. His dark hair was messy, and there was a small smudge of blue ink on his chin from writing the seating cards. He was so normal, so good. For a moment I couldn't speak. The words felt like broken glass in my throat. "He isn't walking me down the aisle," I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it belonged to a stranger. "Delphine is too sad about her broken engagement. Seeing him walk with me would give her anxiety." Thayer blinked. His jaw slowly tightened. He didn't yell or throw things. He just wrapped his arms around me and pulled me against his chest. "I am so sorry, Odessa," he whispered into my hair. "I am so incredibly sorry they are like this." I sat in his arms, but I didn't cry. The sadness I usually felt when my father rejected me was gone. Instead, there was a strange, heavy quiet inside my mind. For 30 years I had chased a carrot on a stick, believing I could earn my place in my own family. But they didn't just want me to be invisible, they wanted me to be less than them. The next morning, December 13th, was the day of our rehearsal dinner. Before going to the venue, I needed to stop by my parents' house on Monterey Square. My grandmother's vintage lace wedding veil was locked in my father's heavy iron safe in his home office. He had promised to give it to me today. When I walked through the heavy front doors, the house was perfectly quiet. It smelled of lemon furniture polish and expensive fresh lilies. I walked down the long hallway toward my father's study. The door was slightly open. My father wasn't inside, but my Uncle Gideon was. Uncle Gideon was my father's younger brother and the vice president of the real estate firm. He was a soft-spoken man who always wore expensive gray suits. Growing up, Uncle Gideon was the nice uncle. He bought me ice cream, smiled warmly, and always smoothed things over when my father was angry. He was standing by the mahogany desk, pouring dark liquor into a crystal glass. He looked up when I walked in. "Odessa," he sighed, offering a tired smile. "I heard about the situation with the wedding march. Listen, kiddo." He took a slow sip of his drink. "Don't make a big deal out of it tonight at the dinner, okay? Your dad is under a lot of stress with the hospital board. Delphine is extremely fragile. Just smile, keep the peace, and get through the weekend." I stared at him. "Keep the peace," I repeated quietly. "My father refuses to stand by me on my wedding day, and you are telling me to smile to protect his mood?" Uncle Gideon looked away, staring at the floor. "It's just how this family works, Odessa. You know Mercer. He pushes, and we bend. You bite your tongue, you protect the family name, and you survive. Don't be difficult." I felt sick to my stomach. He knew how cruel it was, but his own comfort, his job, his easy life, mattered more than doing what was right. I stepped up to the desk to grab the small velvet box containing the veil. As I reached out, my eyes caught something sticking out of a slightly open drawer of my father's desk. It was a yellow file labeled, "Greenhouse Parcel, Manas 402 East Lane." Curiosity took over, and I carefully pulled it open. I froze. I knew that address. It was my greenhouse, the one I paid my father $1,500 every single month to rent. Without thinking, I slid the paper out by an inch. It was a legal trust document dated June 2018, the year my grandmother passed away. I read the bold black ink. Grantor, Emmeline Sterling. Beneficiary, Odessa Sterling. To assume full ownership upon her 25th birthday. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned 25 3 years ago. I kept reading. My father was listed as the trustee. He was supposed to sign the property over to my name in 2021. He never did. He kept the deed hidden in his name, and for the last 36 months, he had been charging me $1,500 for a building that legally, rightfully belonged to me. That was $54,000 of my hard-earned money. Money I had begged and scraped to pay him so he wouldn't throw my business in the street. Uncle Gideon noticed my silence. He turned around, saw what I was looking at, and his face went completely pale. The ice in his glass clinked loudly against the crystal. "Put that down, Odessa," he said, his voice suddenly sharp and panicked. "This is Grandma's trust," I said. My hands were shaking, not from grief, but from a blinding, burning anger. "The greenhouse is mine. He's been taking my rent money for 3 years. Uncle Gideon rubbed the back of his neck, refusing to look me in the eye. "Odessa, try to understand. Your father thought you weren't ready for the financial burden of property taxes. He was managing the asset for you. We all agreed it was the safest way to protect the property until your business was stable. We all agreed." The words hit me like a physical punch. My uncle knew. My mother probably knew. The nice uncle, who told me to just keep the peace, had watched me struggle to buy groceries so I could pay my father rent on a building I already owned. They weren't just ignoring me, they were using me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry or throw the glass off the desk. Real life doesn't work like that. Instead, I carefully slid the document back into the yellow folder, exactly how I found it. I picked up the velvet box with my grandmother's veil. "Have a good evening, Uncle Gideon," I said, my voice completely steady. I turned around and walked out of the house. I had a wedding to get to, and after that I had a war to win. December 14th, 2023. My wedding day. The Riverside cotton mill was beautiful. The old brick walls glowed in the soft light of hundreds of white candles. The smell of eucalyptus and fresh roses filled the cold, damp air. My hands shook slightly as I stood alone in the dark hallway, waiting for the heavy wooden doors to open. Through the narrow crack in the doors, I could see my family. My father, Mercer, was sitting in the very back row near the exit. He was wearing a custom black tuxedo, checking his phone. Beside him sat Delphine, wearing that glittering ivory dress that looked just like a bridal gown. She was whispering to my mother, who was fixing Delphine's hair. None of them were looking at the altar. None of them were looking at the doors. The soft, slow music of a cello began to play. It was my cue. The wedding coordinator, a young woman with a headset, looked at me with deep pity in her eyes. "Are you ready to walk, sweetheart?" she whispered. I took a deep breath. For a second, a sharp pain hit my chest. I was a daughter on her wedding day, abandoned by the man who was supposed to protect her. If you have ever discovered that true guardians are not always blood relatives, but those who step forward when your parents fail, hit subscribe and stay close because this next triumph is something I will never ever forget. "She is not walking by herself," a rough, warm voice said from the shadows. I turned around. Stepping into the dim light was Silas. Silas was Thayer's father. He was a retired mechanic who spent 30 years working at a Ford dealership in town. He was wearing a rented suit that didn't fit him perfectly, and his hands were permanently stained with dark engine oil, no matter how hard he washed them. He stopped next to me and gently held out his arm. "I know I don't wear expensive watches, Odessa," Silas said softly, looking me right in the eyes. "And I don't own any tall buildings. But a father is supposed to walk his little girl down the aisle. If you will let me, I would be the proudest man in Savannah to take you to my son." Tears, hot and fast, finally filled my eyes. This was what real love looked like. It wasn't about money or keeping the peace. It was just about showing up. I slid my arm through his. His rough coat felt like a shield. "Thank you, Silas," I whispered. The heavy wooden doors pulled open. The cello music swelled loudly. As Silas and I stepped into the candlelight, the room went completely silent. Thayer's family, sitting in the front rows, smiled with tears in their eyes. But as we walked past the back rows, I looked directly at my father. Mercer's head snapped up from his phone. When he saw Silas's oil-stained hand holding my arm, the color completely drained from his face. His jaw dropped. For a man who controlled everything and cared only about public image, this was a disaster. The rich, powerful Mercer Sterling had been replaced by a mechanic in a cheap suit in front of all his business partners and the hospital board. My father gripped the edge of his wooden chair, looking like he was about to stand up and shout. My mother covered her mouth in horror. Delphine just stared, her ivory dress suddenly looking very silly in the back row. I didn't look down. I kept my head high, walking past them without stopping, focusing only on Thayer waiting for me at the end of the aisle. The next morning, everything changed. The wedding was over, but my real fight was just starting. In the past, if I upset my father, I would call him crying. I would apologize and beg for his forgiveness. This time, I did nothing. I packed my bags, and Thayer and I went on a quiet 3-day honeymoon to a small cabin in North Carolina. I turned my phone completely off. I didn't answer my mother's 20 angry voicemails. I didn't reply to my Uncle Gideon's nervous text messages. For the first time in 30 years, I cut the invisible string that tied me to them. But I wasn't just hiding, I was planning. When we returned to Savannah in late December, I didn't go back to the greenhouse right away. Instead, I drove my old van downtown to the Chatham County Courthouse. It was a cold Tuesday morning. The air smelled like old paper and floor wax. I walked up to the records window and paid $15 to a bored-looking clerk behind the glass. "I need the official property deed and tax history for 402 East Lane," I said, sliding my driver's license across the counter. "It should be under the Emmeline Sterling Trust." 10 minutes later, the clerk handed me a stack of stamped official county documents. I sat on a wooden bench in the hallway and read every single page. It was all there in black and white. The property legally became mine 3 years ago. The trust required my father to transfer the title, but instead, he filed a quiet extension, claiming I was financially unstable and failing to generate enough profit to manage the property taxes, invoking a financial stability clause hidden deep in the trust. He had forged my signature on a property management agreement. I looked at the forged signature. The ink was blue. My father always signed his legal documents with a special, expensive blue fountain pen. He didn't just hide the truth, he committed fraud. I carefully folded the documents and put them in my bag. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone outside of my father's wealthy circle. Someone who wasn't afraid of the name Mercer Sterling. I had $54,000 of stolen rent to get back, a greenhouse to claim, and a very large mask to pull off my father's face. The scared little girl was gone. The heater in Harlan Cresswell's office rattled loudly, blowing dry, dusty air across his scratched wooden desk. It was January 4th, 2024. Outside, a cold gray rain washed over the cobblestone streets of downtown Savannah. I sat in a cracked leather chair, watching Harlan read through the stack of county documents I had pulled. Harlan was not the kind of lawyer my father would ever hire. He didn't wear a custom suit, and his office on the second floor of an old brick building on Bay Street smelled faintly of stale coffee and wet newspaper. But Harlan spent 15 years working as a property disputes attorney for the city. He knew every zoning law, every tax loophole, and every dirty trick wealthy landlords used in Chatham County. Thayer had found his name through a teacher at his school. Harlan was my first step in building a new team, people who didn't care about the Sterling family name. Harlan slowly lowered the papers. He took off his reading glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Your father filed a declaration of financial mismanagement," Harlan said, his voice gravelly and calm. He tapped a thick, calloused finger against the yellow paper. "Right here. 3 years ago, when you turned 25, he submitted this to the court. It claims that your business was failing, and you lacked the financial stability to manage the property's taxes and upkeep. Therefore, as the trustee, he extended his control over the asset." I stared at the paper. "He never took me to a doctor. I have never been diagnosed with any mental instability. I run a profitable business." "I know," Harlan said. He leaned forward, pointing to the bottom of the page. "And to make the court believe it, he needed your signature on this property management agreement, giving him permission to transfer the property into his own corporate portfolio to save it. Is this your signature, Odessa?" I looked at the blue ink on the page. It looked like my handwriting, but the loops were too sharp. "No, that is my father's blue fountain pen ink. He forged it." Harlan let out a long, heavy breath. He leaned back in his squeaky chair. "Odessa, this is not just a family disagreement. Forging a beneficiary's signature to maintain control of a trust is fraud. It is a felony. He breached his fiduciary duty to keep collecting your money." Hearing a lawyer say the words out loud made the room spin slightly. My father, the man who shook hands with the mayor and donated to hospitals, was a thief. He stole from his own daughter. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I want my greenhouse, and I want the $54,000 I paid him in rent." Harlan picked up a yellow notepad. "Real-life court is not a movie, Odessa. If we file a lawsuit, Mercer will hire the most expensive defense firm in Georgia. He will drag this out for a year. He will try to bury us in paperwork until you run out of money. To win, we need undeniable proof that you paid him under the false belief of a rental agreement." "I have the checks," I said quickly. I wrote him a check for $1,500 on the first of every single month, for 36 months. "I need the cleared copies from your bank," Harlan said. "I need to see his signature on the back, proving he personally deposited the money into his accounts. If we have that, we can trap him." I will take your case, but I need a $5,000 retainer to start filing the motions. $5,000. It was almost everything Thayer and I had left in our joint savings account. I thought about my father paying a $3,000 repair bill for Delphine's scratched car without blinking. I will get you the check by tomorrow, I said, standing up. Later that afternoon, I drove to Chatham First Bank on Victory Drive. I sat at a small cubicle with a bank teller for 2 hours. I paid the $45 fee to print out 3 years of archived check images. When the teller handed me the thick stack of paper, I sat in my van in the parking lot and flipped through them. January 2021, $1,500. Memo, greenhouse rent. May 2022, $1,500. Memo, greenhouse rent. September 2023, $1,500. Memo, greenhouse rent. I turned the pages over. On the back of every single check, in that same expensive blue ink, was my father's signature, Mercer J. Sterling for deposit only. He read the memo line every single month. He knew I was scraping the money together, working late into the night with bleeding fingers, just to pay him for a building my grandmother had already given me. He took the money anyway. He took it to keep me small. He took it to keep me under his thumb. My chest physically ached. It was a deep, bruising pain. The last tiny piece of hope I had that my father loved me completely died in the front seat of that cold van. I carefully put the papers into a heavy plastic folder. The sadness was gone. Now there was only cold, calculated focus. Harlan and I had the proof. But filing a lawsuit quietly wasn't enough. Mercer Sterling lived for his public image. If I was going to take him down, I was going to do it where it hurt him the most. I just needed the right moment. And looking at my calendar, I knew exactly when that moment would be. My parents' 35th wedding anniversary party was only 2 months away. The damp chill of January lingered into February, clinging to the historic brick lanes of Savannah. Inside my greenhouse, the heater hummed steadily, keeping rows of white ranunculus and pink spray roses from freezing. For the first time in my life, I worked inside that glass space, knowing it belonged to me. Every pane of glass, every rusty table, every wooden shelf holding clay pots was my grandmother Emmeline's legacy to her granddaughter. Yet, I said nothing. I didn't storm into my father's house. I didn't send an angry text message. Following Harlan Cresswell's strict legal advice, I kept my routine utterly normal. Silence, Harlan had reminded me during our weekly Tuesday phone calls, was the sharpest shield during pre-litigation. On February 8, 2024, the front bell of the greenhouse jingled. I looked up from trimming eucalyptus stems. Walking down the center gravel path was my older brother Callahan. He was wearing his tailored charcoal wool coat, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He looked tired, with dark shadows under his eyes. "Hey, Odessa," he said quietly, stopping a few feet away from my work table. "Callahan," I replied, setting down my floral shears. The cold metal clinked against the zinc table. "What are you doing here on a Tuesday afternoon?" Callahan shifted his weight, his eyes darting to the glass ceiling, then to the floor. He picked up a dried pine cone from a wooden box, turned over in his hand, and put it back down. "Mom said you haven't answered her calls in 3 weeks, Callahan began, his voice low and hesitant. "Dad is, well, he's furious about the wedding. He says you humiliated the family by having Silas walk you down the aisle instead of walking solo like Mom suggested. People from the hospital board have been making comments." I looked at my brother. Callahan had always been the quiet bystander. When our father criticized my work or mocked my hands, Callahan would look down at his phone. When our father bought Delphine a new sports car while demanding rent from me, Callahan stayed silent to protect his own corporate salary at the real estate firm. "Did you come here just to deliver Dad's complaints, Callahan?" I asked evenly. Callahan sighed, rubbing his forehead. "No, I came to tell you to just apologize, Odessa, for the sake of the family. The 35th wedding anniversary dinner is coming up on March 20th at the DeSoto Hotel. Dad invited the entire Savannah City Council and the regional developers. If you don't show up with Thayer and clear the air, he's going to cut you off completely." "Cut me off from what?" I asked, looking him straight in the eyes. "From everything," Callahan mumbled, looking away toward the back corner of the greenhouse. "From the family trust. From this greenhouse. He said if you don't make amends before March, he's terminating your commercial lease here and giving the parcel to a development client." A cold stillness filled the room. I stepped closer to my brother. "Callahan, do you know whose name is on the original title deed for this land?" Callahan froze. His hand, resting on the wooden table, twitched slightly. He didn't answer. "You're a financial analyst at Sterling Realty," I said, my voice barely louder than a whisper, but cutting through the quiet greenhouse like a blade. You manage the firm's portfolio filings. Did you know Grandma left this greenhouse to me in her 2018 will? Callahan swallowed hard. The color slowly drained from his cheeks. He stared at the floorboards, refusing to meet my gaze. Odessa, please, Callahan whispered, his voice cracking with genuine discomfort. You don't understand how Dad operates. He has legal teams on retainer. He has city officials at his dinner parties. If you challenge him, he will crush your business before the first hearing even happens. I have a mortgage. Maris is expecting our first baby in July. If I go against him, Dad will fire me by 5 o'clock today and blacklist me across Georgia. I can't fight him. The truth was laid out between us, plain and ugly. Callahan didn't stay silent because he was blind. He stayed silent because his comfort had a price tag, and my survival was the currency he used to pay for it. I'm not asking you to fight him, Callahan, I said calmly. I'm just asking you to step out of the way. Callahan stared at me for a long moment, seeing something in my eyes that had never been there before. The anxious, people-pleasing little sister who begged for scraps of approval was gone. Without saying another word, Callahan reached into the inside pocket of his wool coat. He pulled out a small, plain white envelope and set it quietly beside my floral clippers. What is this? I asked. It's the internal Sterling Realty asset ledger from 2021, Callahan said, his voice shaking. It lists every private property transferred under the Emmeline Sterling estate. Dad marked 402 East Lane as internal corporate transfer to bypass probate notification. Don't tell anyone where you got it. Please, Odessa, don't ruin me. Callahan turned around and walked briskly out into the cold Savannah drizzle, the greenhouse door shutting behind him with a dull thud. I picked up the envelope with steady fingers. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. The enablers were cracking under the weight of their own cowardice, and the weapon I needed for March 20th was now fully in my hands. The smell of roasted garlic and melted butter filled our small apartment. It was late Tuesday evening. Outside, the streetlights of Savannah glowed yellow through the thick winter fog. Thayer was standing by the stove in his faded gray sweatpants, stirring a pot of pasta. He was humming a low, quiet song under his breath. I sat frozen on a wooden stool at the kitchen island. Between my hands lay the white paper Callahan had given me. At the top of the page, printed in sharp black letters, was the official logo for Sterling Realty. Below it was a spreadsheet. My eyes traced the lines over and over, locking onto row 42. Asset, 402 East Lane, greenhouse parcel. Original status, Emmeline Sterling Trust. Action, internal corporate transfer. Authorized by Mercer J. Sterling. Thayer turned off the stove. He wiped his hands on a kitchen towel and walked over to me. He noticed how perfectly still I was sitting. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just stepped behind my stool, wrapped his arms around my shoulders, and looked down at the paper on the counter. For a long minute, the only sound in the apartment was the hum of the refrigerator. Thayer slowly rested his chin on the top of my head. Is this what I think it is, Odessa? He asked. His voice was incredibly soft, but I could feel the tension in his chest against my back. Callahan brought it to the greenhouse today, I whispered, staring blindly at the numbers. He told me Dad is going to kick me out and give my property to a developer if I don't go to the anniversary dinner and apologize for my wedding. Callahan told me not to fight back because it would ruin his job. But then, he handed me this. Thayer gently pulled the paper out from between my hands. He read it carefully. Callahan knew, Thayer said flatly. Your brother knew your father stole your property, and he let you pay rent anyway. He has a mortgage, I said. It wasn't an excuse. It was just a sad, empty fact. Dad bought his loyalty, but Callahan is scared now. He knows Dad went too far, and he doesn't want to go down with the ship. Thayer turned me around on the stool. His hands held my arms, steady and warm. Odessa, look at me. I looked up into his dark, tired eyes. You are not paying that man another $1. We are going to fix this. We are going to end this. The next morning, I sat across from Harlan Cresswell in his dusty downtown office. The sky outside his window was the color of bruised iron. Rain slapped heavily against the glass. Harlan put on his reading glasses. He picked up the Sterling Realty internal ledger and studied it. The old wooden clock on his wall ticked loudly. Tick, tick, tick. Finally, Harlan took off his glasses and dropped them on his desk. He let out a low whistle. This is the smoking gun, Odessa, Harlan said, his gravelly voice thick with disbelief. Your father didn't just hide the trust documents. He actively moved the property out of the trust and into his corporate portfolio, without notifying you or the state. It is a direct violation of probate law. And with this internal document, we can prove he knew exactly what he was doing. So, we have him, I said. My hands were folded tightly in my lap. Legally? Yes, Harlan nodded. He grabbed a pen and started making quick notes on his yellow pad. I can file a civil complaint by Friday. I will petition the court to freeze the assets so he can't sell the greenhouse to any developers. But Odessa, you need to understand how real life works. I looked at him. What do you mean? Mercer Sterling is a powerful man, Harlan explained, pointing the pen at me. If I file this in court tomorrow, he will hire a team of expensive lawyers. They will file endless motions. They will ask the judge to seal the records to protect his business reputation. He will lock us in a dark courtroom for 2 years, trying to bleed your bank account dry. He will use the quiet to survive. I thought about the dark courtroom. I thought about my father sitting at the head of the Thanksgiving table, mocking my dirty hands while his friends laughed. I thought about him sitting in the back row of my wedding, choosing his public image over his own daughter. No, I said quietly. Harlan stopped writing. No? My father's entire life is built on his public mask, I said, leaning forward slightly in the leather chair. If we fight him in a quiet courtroom, he wins. He only cares about what society thinks of him. He only cares about the hospital board, the mayor, and his investors. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick, cream-colored invitation to my parents' 35th wedding anniversary dinner. I slid it across the scratched desk. The dinner is on March 20th at the DeSoto Hotel, I said, my voice completely steady. Everyone who matters to him will be in that ballroom. If we serve him the papers there, in front of the people he needs, he won't be able to hide behind his expensive lawyers. We don't just take his money, Harlan. We take the one thing he actually loves. Harlan stared at the elegant invitation. He looked back up at me, his eyes narrowing in careful respect. It will be a bloodbath, Odessa, he warned softly. There is no going back after that. I know, I replied. Draft the papers. The morning of March 20th, 2024, felt strangely normal. I woke up at 5 a.m., drove to the greenhouse, and spent 4 hours packing white orchids for a Sunday baby shower. The smell of wet earth and crushed leaves calmed my nerves. I swept the dirt off the concrete floor. I watered the hanging ferns. I pressed my bare palm against the cold glass walls, reminding myself exactly why I was doing this. This building was mine. At 4 p.m., I went back to the apartment to get ready. The DeSoto Hotel ballroom was famous for its grand, dripping crystal chandeliers and heavy velvet curtains. My mother had sent me a text message earlier that week, demanding black tie attire and reminding me to look presentable for the cameras. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror. I wasn't wearing the silk blue dress my mother had picked out for me months ago. Instead, I wore a tailored dark emerald green suit that I had bought myself. It was sharp, professional, and felt like heavy armor. My nails were cut short, clean and unpolished. Thayer walked into the room, adjusting a simple black tie. He looked at me in the mirror and smiled softly. You look like a boss, he said, handing me my silver watch. On the bed lay a thick, heavy black binder. Harlan Cresswell had given it to me yesterday afternoon. Inside were copies of the forged declaration of incapacity, the cleared bank checks with my father's signature on the back, the internal Sterling Realty ledger Callahan had provided, and a formally drafted civil lawsuit for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Harlan had also hired a licensed process server. His name was Mr. Willoughby, a tall, quiet man who wore a plain gray raincoat. Mr. Willoughby would be waiting in the hotel lobby at exactly 8:15 p.m., right when my father was scheduled to give his grand anniversary toast to the entire room. Are you ready? Thayer asked, picking up the black binder. Yes, I breathed out. My heart was beating fast, a nervous drumming against my ribs, but my hands were completely steady. We drove to the hotel in Thayer's old Honda. The city streets were wet from an afternoon rain shower, reflecting the yellow streetlights. The parking valet, wearing a crisp red jacket with gold buttons, gave our faded car a quick, confused look before handing us a ticket and driving it away. We walked up the wide, carpeted stairs toward the Oglethorpe ballroom. The heavy wooden doors were wide open. The sound of a live jazz quartet playing a smooth, slow song floated into the hallway. Waiters in white gloves moved quickly through the crowd, carrying silver trays of tall champagne glasses and miniature crab cakes. The massive room smelled of expensive vanilla perfume, roasted beef, and the heavy, sweet scent of imported lilies. I stepped inside the warm ballroom, and my eyes immediately found them. My father, Mercer, stood near the head table in the center of the room. He was holding a crystal glass of dark scotch, laughing loudly at a joke told by the mayor of Savannah. My mother stood next to him in a silver gown, wearing a diamond necklace that sparkled under the chandeliers, nodding enthusiastically at everything the mayor's wife said. Delphine was there too, wearing a bright red dress, holding court with a group of young wealthy heirs from the country club. For a split second, the old familiar fear tried to crawl up my throat. This was their kingdom. In this room, surrounded by politicians and millionaires, my father was a king. If I stepped out of line here, they would usually crush me without a second thought. But then I felt Thayer's hand on the small of my back, a steady, solid, grounding pressure, and I felt the physical weight of the black binder resting under my own arm. Uncle Gideon was the first family member to see me. He was standing by the corner bar, waiting for a drink. When he saw my emerald suit instead of a dress, and the thick black folder in my hands, his drink stopped halfway to his mouth. He blinked, his face turning slightly pale under the dim lights. He quickly nudged my mother's arm. Blythe turned around. Her polite, camera-ready smile instantly dropped. She whispered something sharply to my father. Mercer turned slowly, his cold eyes locking onto mine across the crowded, noisy room. He didn't look happy to see his eldest daughter. He looked deeply annoyed. He gave me a sharp, tiny nod with his chin. It was a silent command that meant, "Come over here, stand quietly in the background, and do not embarrass me." I didn't walk toward him. I didn't smile. I walked to a small, empty table near the back exit doors, exactly where he had chosen to sit during my wedding. I put the heavy black binder down on the crisp white tablecloth with a soft thud. I pulled out a chair and sat down. Thayer sat right beside me. I looked at my watch. It was 7:45 p.m. The dinner plates were about to be served. My father's perfect, carefully controlled world was ticking down to its final 30 minutes. At 7:45 p.m., waiters in neat black vests began bringing out the first course. The clinking sound of heavy silver forks hitting porcelain plates echoed across the large ballroom. The jazz band switched to a lively, upbeat tune. I didn't touch my roasted tomato soup. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting in my lap. A few minutes later, I saw my mother whisper something to my father. She put down her cloth napkin, smoothed the front of her silver gown, and walked quickly across the room toward my table. Her high heels clicked sharply against the polished wooden floor. She kept a bright, fake smile on her face as she passed the mayor's table. But the moment she reached us, her smile vanished. "Odessa," Blythe whispered loudly, leaning over the table so the other guests wouldn't hear. "What exactly are you doing? Why are you sitting by the exit doors like a stranger? Your father reserved a seat for you at table 3, right next to Delphine." "I am fine right here, Mom," I said. My voice was calm and flat. My mother's eyes darted to Thayer, then to the heavy black binder sitting on the white tablecloth, and finally back to my face. She frowned deeply. "You are embarrassing us. This is not a funeral. It is a celebration. Take off that ridiculous green jacket, fix your hair, and come sit where people can see you supporting this family. The hospital board is watching." "No," I said softly. Blythe froze. Her perfectly painted red lips parted slightly. In 30 years, I had never just said no to her. I had always argued, or cried, or tried to explain my feelings. This time, I offered nothing. "Excuse me?" she snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "After what you pulled at your wedding, you are going to sit here and be difficult? Your father is extremely stressed tonight. If you ruin this dinner for him, I promise you, Odessa, he will what, Mom?" I interrupted, looking directly into her eyes. "Take my greenhouse? Kick me out? He already did those things. You have nothing left to threaten me with." Blythe stared at me. For a single second, a flash of genuine panic crossed her face. She looked at the black binder again, suddenly realizing she had no control over me anymore. Without saying another word, she turned around and marched back to the head table. I watched her whisper into my father's ear. Mercer didn't even look in my direction. He just tightened his jaw, picked up his glass of dark scotch, and took a long sip. He would deal with my disobedience later, in private, where he could yell and crush me safely behind closed doors. But I was never going back behind those closed doors. The clock on my wrist moved to 8:05 p.m. The waiters cleared the dinner plates and brought out small crystal bowls of chocolate dessert. The room grew warmer, filled with the loud hum of wealthy people laughing and doing business. At 8:12 p.m., the jazz band stopped playing. My father stood up from his chair. He buttoned his custom black suit jacket and walked slowly toward the center stage. A waiter handed him a microphone. The entire ballroom grew quiet. Hundreds of faces turned to look at the great Mercer Sterling. "Good evening, everyone," my father said. His voice was deep, smooth, and warm. It was his public voice, the one he used to win over investors and charm politicians. The crowd gently clapped. Mercer smiled, holding up a hand to quiet them. 35 years ago, I married my beautiful wife Blythe, he continued, looking warmly at my mother. She smiled back, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. But building a successful marriage is like building a successful business. It takes honesty, it takes trust, and above all, it takes a deep, unwavering commitment to your family. Sitting in the back row, I felt my stomach turn. Honesty, trust, family. He was saying these words while $54,000 of my stolen rent money sat in his private bank account. Everything I have built in this great city of Savannah, my father said, his voice echoing through the speakers. I built to leave a legacy for my children. Delphine, Callahan. He paused for a fraction of a second, his eyes quickly darting toward the back of the room before looking away. And Odessa. Family is the foundation of everything good in this world. The crowd broke into loud applause. Delphine smiled brightly and waved at someone taking a photo. Callahan stared down at his shoes, his face pale and sweating. I checked my watch. 8:14 p.m. The heavy wooden exit doors next to my table opened with a soft click. Mr. Willoughby stepped inside. He was wearing his plain gray raincoat, looking completely out of place in the sea of diamonds and tuxedos. He held a thick, sealed yellow envelope in his hand. He looked at me, and I gave him a single, small nod. I picked up my black binder from the table. Thayer stood up next to me, his presence solid and unwavering. My father was still smiling, holding his glass of champagne in the air for a final toast. To family, he called out. To family, the crowd repeated, raising their glasses. I took a deep breath, stepped out from behind my table, and began walking straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, directly toward the stage. Mr. Willoughby walked right beside me. The loud applause slowly began to die down as people noticed us. The room grew quiet. My green heels clicked against the polished wooden floor. Click, click, click. The sound cut through the quiet room like a hammer. Waiters stopped moving. The mayor of Savannah put down his crystal champagne glass. Hundreds of eyes stared at me as I walked down the center aisle, but I didn't look at them. I only looked at my father. Mercer Sterling stood on the stage, his custom jacket buttoned perfectly, his hand still holding the microphone. As I got closer, the warm, charming smile on his face began to strain. The muscles in his jaw tightened. Odessa, my father said into the microphone, letting out a soft, fake laugh for the crowd. Sweetheart, I think you are a little late for the toast. Please, go sit with your sister. I didn't stop. I walked right up to the edge of the stage, standing under the bright lights. Mr. Willoughby stood shoulder to shoulder with me. Mercer Sterling? Mr. Willoughby asked. His voice was boring and completely normal, which made it feel even louder in the fancy, quiet room. Yes? My father answered. His eyes darted nervously toward the mayor's table. You are officially served, Mr. Willoughby said. He pressed the thick yellow envelope directly against my father's chest. These are your official court summons, Mr. Willoughby added, stepping back. My father was so surprised he didn't even lift his hands. The envelope slid down his black tuxedo and fell onto the wooden stage with a heavy slap. A loud gasp echoed across the front row. My mother's hands flew up to cover her mouth. Delphine dropped her phone on the floor. My father quickly covered the microphone with his hand. The warm, smiling king was gone. His face turned a dark, angry red. He leaned down toward me, his eyes looking cold and mean. Are you out of your mind? He hissed, his voice like a snake, meant only for my ears. Security is going to drag you out of here by your hair. I will make sure you never sell a single flower in this town again. You are finished, Odessa. You already tried to finish me, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was incredibly steady. I opened my black binder. I pulled out a thick stack of papers and dropped them onto the white tablecloth of the mayor's table, right in front of the stage. The pages spread out next to the expensive dinner plates. What is this garbage? My father spat, his breathing suddenly heavy. He could smell his own expensive cologne mixing with the sudden, sharp scent of his own fear. Those are copies, I said, looking straight into his angry eyes. Copies of the forged property documents, copies of the internal company ledger, and copies of 36 bank checks. I pointed to the papers on the table. The mayor slowly leaned forward, putting on his reading glasses. $54,000, Dad, I said, my voice carrying clearly to the first 3 rows of tables. That is how much rent I paid you over the last 3 years. I worked until my hands bled to give you that money, just so you wouldn't kick me out of a greenhouse that Grandma already left to me in her will. You forged my signature. You stole my property. The mayor looked down at the bank checks. He saw the blue ink signatures on the back. He slowly pushed his chair back, putting distance between himself and the stage. The hospital board director whispered something sharply to his wife. "It was a management decision," my mother cried out, rushing forward in her silver dress. She looked panicked and small. "We were protecting you. You don't know how to handle money, Odessa. We did this for the family." I looked at my mother. "You let me eat instant noodles for dinner so I could pay rent to my own father," I said softly. "That wasn't protection, that was theft." Uncle Gideon rushed out from the corner of the room, his hands raised in the air. "Odessa, please," he begged, his face sweating. "Put the papers away. We will write you a check right now. We can fix this quietly in the back room. Just think of the family name." "No more back rooms, Uncle Gideon," I said. I looked around the room. I saw Callahan standing near the back wall. He looked at me, gave a tiny sad nod, and looked down at his shoes. He knew it was over. "You told me to keep the peace. You told me to bend, but I am done bending for people who break me." My father saw his world collapsing. He saw his wealthy friends pulling away. His public mask was shattered on the floor, and he couldn't put it back together. Panic took over. "It's a lie," my father shouted to the room, grabbing the microphone away from his chest. "My daughter is sick. She is confused. Security, remove her." But nobody clapped. Nobody moved to help him. The security guards stood frozen at the doors. The silence in the ballroom was heavy and dark. They had seen the bank checks. They had heard the blind panic in my father's voice. I didn't argue with him. I didn't need to scream or cry to prove I was right. The truth was sitting on the table, and he could not manipulate paper and ink. I closed my empty black binder. I turned my back on my father. Thayer was standing at the end of the aisle, waiting for me. I walked back down the center of the ballroom. Nobody tried to stop me. In fact, the crowd of wealthy, powerful people actually stepped back, giving me a wide, clear path to walk out the door. The cold night air hit my face as Thayer and I walked out of the hotel. I didn't look back at the grand glass doors. We got into Thayer's old Honda. When he turned the key, the engine sputtered slightly before humming to life. As we drove away from downtown Savannah, the adrenaline slowly left my body. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. I leaned my head against the cold passenger window, and for the first time in months, I started to cry. I wasn't crying because I felt guilty. I was crying because it was finally over. The tiny foolish hope I had carried since I was a little girl, the hope that my father would one day look at me with pride if I was just good enough, was completely dead. Thayer didn't tell me to stop crying. He didn't offer empty words to make it better. He just reached across the center console and held my rough, scarred hand tightly in his. Real life does not wrap up neatly in a single night. The next few weeks were a quiet, heavy kind of messy. Because of what happened at the anniversary dinner, my father could not hide behind closed doors anymore. The mayor immediately distanced himself from Sterling Realty to protect his own political campaign. 2 hospital board members quietly resigned, rather than be associated with a public fraud scandal. My father's perfect, shiny mask was gone. The pure panic of losing his business empire forced his hand. In mid-April, I sat in Harlan Cresswell's dusty office. A soft spring rain tapped against the window. Harlan pushed a thick white legal document across his scratched wooden desk. "Mercer's lawyers sent the settlement over this morning," Harlan said, his gravelly voice softer than usual. "He is transferring the greenhouse title into your name unconditionally. He is also wiring the $54,000, plus all legal fees, directly to your bank account by tomorrow at noon. In exchange, he requires you to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. He is terrified of the press. If he fights you in open court now, the city will open a full investigation into his firm, so he chose to buy your silence and cut his losses." I picked up the heavy black pen. I stared at the paper. There was no apology letter attached. There was no phone call from my father asking for forgiveness. He was only giving me my own property back because it protected his money. I signed my name on the dotted line. The ink dried fast. That afternoon, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a long text message from my mother. "Odessa, your father is taking blood pressure medication now. Delphine hasn't left her bedroom in 3 weeks because people are whispering about us at the club. I hope you are happy with the destruction you caused. When you are ready to apologize and act like a daughter again, my door is open. Until then, do not contact us." I read the words twice. A year ago, a message like that would have crushed me. I would have felt a heavy, suffocating guilt. I would have driven to their house and begged them to forgive me for ruining their night. But as I stood in my quiet kitchen, I just felt tired. They still believed they were the victims. They would always believe it, because admitting they were wrong was too painful for them. I didn't type a reply. I didn't try to explain myself. I pressed my thumb against the screen and blocked my mother's number. I went to my father's contact and blocked him too. I blocked Delphine, and finally, Uncle Gideon. I set the phone down on the counter. The apartment was perfectly still. It was the first time in 30 years that the silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like breathing. By late June 2024, the heavy Savannah heat had returned, turning the air thick and damp. Inside the greenhouse, however, the temperature was perfectly cool. With the money I recovered, I had paid a local crew to install a powerful new air conditioning system. The soft hum of the metal fans mixed with the smell of wet soil and blooming white jasmine. I stood at my wooden work table, sorting through a pile of bright yellow sunflowers for a summer wedding. My hands were still rough. They still had tiny healing cuts from thorns and wire. But now when I looked at my dirty fingers, I didn't feel ashamed. I just saw the hands that built my life. The front doors of the greenhouse opened, letting in a quick rush of hot wind. Silas walked in, wearing his old faded denim shirt. He was carrying a heavy metal wrench. Right behind him was Thayer, holding 2 tall glasses of cold, sweet iced tea. "I fixed that leaky copper pipe near the back sink for you, Odessa," Silas said, wiping his oily hands on a red shop towel. He smiled, the deep wrinkles around his eyes showing. "It should hold up perfectly for your busy season." "Thank you, Silas," I said. I handed him a glass of iced tea. The ice cubes clinked happily against the glass. He didn't ask for a rent check. He didn't tell me my fingernails were ugly. He just saw a problem and helped me fix it. Thayer leaned against my work table, taking a sip of his drink. "The mail carrier came by," he said gently. He reached into his pocket and placed a single small white envelope on the table next to the sunflowers. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Callahan's. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked it up. Inside was a short handwritten note on expensive paper. "Odessa. Maris had a baby girl yesterday. Dad paid the hospital bill and bought us a bigger house near the golf course. We really miss you. Just tell Dad you are sorry, and you can come meet your niece. Please, Odessa. It is lonely without you." I traced the edge of the paper with my thumb. A year ago, reading this would have broken my heart. I would have rushed to the hospital, apologized for things I didn't do, and tried to squeeze myself back into their perfect, painful picture. But today, looking at the words, I only felt a quiet, dull sadness for my brother. He was still in the cage, eating the golden crumbs our father dropped for him, trading his freedom for a paid hospital bill and a nice house. He still believed that keeping the peace was better than telling the truth. I didn't feel angry. I just knew I could not go back into the cage to save him. I folded the letter neatly, walked over to a small metal trash can in the corner of the greenhouse, and dropped it inside. I didn't write back. I didn't call. Sometimes, protecting your own life means letting the silence do the talking. I walked back to my table. Thayer reached out and gently pulled a loose piece of hair behind my ear. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, and then I looked at Silas, who was carefully examining a potted fern in the corner, humming an old song. These 2 men had none of my blood in their veins. But when my world was falling apart, they were the ones who stood beside me in the dark. They were the ones who held my arm when the people who were supposed to protect me walked away. "I'm perfectly fine," I said. And for the first time in my entire life, it was completely true. I picked up my metal floral shears, smiled at my husband, and went back to work. If my journey taught you that peace is worth more than toxic ties, share this with someone who needs empowerment. Thank you for watching my story. See you in the next.